All right, ready to dive deep into some Kenyan property law.
Sounds good to me.
Today we're tackling those sometimes confusing, sometimes tricky cautions, caveats, and restrictions.
Yeah, they can definitely trip people up.
Especially, if you're not familiar with the ins and outs of the Kenyan property market.
For sure, it's essential to understand these things before you jump into any property transactions.
Absolutely. So let's start by, I guess, sort of defining these terms. I mean, what exactly are cautions, caveats, and restrictions, and why should our listeners care about them?
Okay, so think of them like this. They're legal tools
Okay.
that can temporarily, freeze certain actions on a property.
Like a pause button.
Yeah, exactly. A pause button to protect someone's rights or interests in that property.
Okay, so it's like a way of saying, hold on a second, let's make sure everything is straight before we proceed with anything else.
Exactly. A great example is, a family inheritance dispute. One family member might put a caution on the property.
To protect their potential inheritance?
Yes, exactly. That prevents anyone else from selling it off before everything is legally sorted out.
Smart move. That makes a lot of sense. So to do that, to put a caution on a property, is there a specific process?
Yes, there is.
Like paperwork or forms?
Absolutely. There's a form for it. It's called Form LRA 67.
LRA 67. Got it.
And this form requires specific information. It asks about your, interest claimed, the extent or the scope of the caution you're placing.
So you have to be very clear about what you're trying to protect and how it affects the property.
Absolutely. Vague claims, they just won't cut it. You need to be specific, Articulate your interest, what actions you're trying to prevent.
Okay, so clarity is key here.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, what about restrictions? Are those the same thing as cautions?
They're similar, but with a slight difference. Think of restrictions as broader limitations on the property. They might be related to things like land use, development rights, or financial obligations.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, a caution is about a specific claim, while a restriction is more about setting some general rules for the property.
No, got it. You're exactly right.
And I'm guessing there's a specific form for applying for a restriction too, right?
So bet it's called Form LRA 75.
Okay, so LRA 67 for cautions, LRA 75 for restrictions.
Exactly. This form requires you to spell out why you're asking for the restriction, what exactly it entails, and how long it's going to last.
Sounds like a lot of legal jargon and paperwork.
Oh, yeah, it definitely can be. That's why it's crucial to have a lawyer involved.
Oh, for sure. Someone who really knows the intricacies of Kenyan property law.
Right. They can guide you through the whole process, make sure everything's done correctly, and explain any potential legal implications.
Because, I'm assuming if you mess this up, it could have some serious consequences.
Yeah, absolutely it could.
Okay, so we've got cautions, we've got restrictions. What else?
Well, the most common type of restriction that you'll likely encounter is a caveat.
Okay, a caveat. Tell me more about caveats.
Sure. A caveat is typically used to protect a financial interest in a property.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, imagine you're a lender giving someone a mortgage, right? You want to make sure they can't just turn around and sell the property without paying you back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, it would be a pretty bad investment.
Exactly. So you'd place a caveat on the property.
That makes sense.
Basically saying, hey, there's a debt tied to this property, and you can't sell it without settling that debt.
It's like a safety net for the lender.
Yes, exactly.
But what about, can buyers use these tools to protect themselves as well?
Absolutely. Buyers can use them too. Let's say you found your dream house, right? You've signed a sale agreement, but the actual transfer of ownership, it's going to take a while.
Okay.
You wouldn't want the seller to back out and sell to someone else, would you?
No, that would be a nightmare.
Exactly. So you, as a buyer, can put a caveat on the property to prevent that from happening.
Wow, that's really smart.
Yeah.
It's almost like putting a reserved sign on it.
Yeah, exactly. A reserved sign, so no one else can just swoop in and snatch it up.
So it sounds like the whole point of cautions, caveats, and restrictions is to make sure everyone plays fair in the property market.
Exactly. That's the goal. And that's why understanding these tools is so important in the Kenyan property market. It gives you the power to protect your interests and navigate the process with confidence.
So I'm hearing you say knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Now, besides inheritance and securing loans, what are some other situations where these tools would be crucial?
Well, another common situation is when property is used as collateral for a debt.
Okay.
The restriction basically makes sure that the creditor is protected.
It's like a guarantee for the lender.
Exactly. If the borrower can't pay back the debt, the lender has a claim on the property.
Right, so it's a way to ensure that lenders aren't left high and dry if things go south.
Precisely. It's all about managing risks.
And the materials we looked at also mentioned that these tools can prevent some pretty shady dealings, like, unauthorized sales or even outright fraud.
Oh, for sure.
Can you give us an example of how that might play out in real life?
Yeah, imagine someone tries to sell a property they don't even own.
Oh, wow.
A buyer, being diligent, doing their research, would uncover a caution or a caveat placed by the rightful owner.
And that would stop the whole thing dead in its tracks.
It would raise some serious red flags for sure.
So it's kind of like a built-in alarm system in the property market.
Yeah, it is. It helps promote transparency, makes it a lot harder for people to pull a fast one.
So we've talked about cautions and caveats. But the materials also mention some other types of restrictions, like lay-ins, easements, and zoning.
Yeah, there are quite a few.
Can you break those down for us a little bit?
Sure. So lay-ins, they're basically financial restrictions.
Okay.
They're attached to a property because of an unpaid debt. Think of it this way. Someone owes money. The property acts as collateral. Until the debt is cleared, that line hangs over the property, preventing the owner from selling or transferring it freely.
Oh, I see. So it's like a financial burden that sticks to the property.
Yeah, until it's resolved. Now, easements are a little different.
Okay.
They give someone the right to use a part of your property for a specific purpose, even though they don't own it.
That sounds a bit odd. Why would anyone agree to that?
Well, think about shared driveways or access to utility lines.
Oh, wow. Right.
Easements allow for these things to exist without creating ownership disputes.
So, for example, my neighbor might have an easement that gives them the right to use part of my driveway to get to their property.
Exactly.
And that easement would be legally binding even if I sold my property, right?
Yeah, they usually carry over to new owners.
Okay, so that's easements. What about zoning?
Zoning? That's pretty straightforward.
Okay, good.
It's determined by the local authorities, and it dictates how the land can be used.
So whether it's for residential, commercial, industrial, that sort of thing?
Precisely. It's all about planning, making sure different types of land use don't clash.
So zoning is like the rule book for how land can be developed.
You got it.
Okay, so we've covered liens, easements, zoning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while I was going through all this material, the question popped into my mind.
Okay.
Could a lease, a regular lease agreement, also act like a restriction on a property?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes. In a way, it can. While a lease primarily gives a tenant the right to live in a property, a registered lease does restrict what an owner can do with that property during the lease period.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, for instance, the owner wouldn't be able to just sell the property without considering the tenant's lease agreement. The new owner would have to honor that existing lease.
So it limits the owner's options regarding selling or making major changes until the lease expires.
Exactly. It might not be a permanent restriction, but it definitely has an impact.
Wow. So property ownership in Kenya really involves a lot of legal intricacies.
It definitely does. Understanding these intricacies can help you avoid potential headaches and make informed decisions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from cautions and caveats to lanes and easements. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good. It's all about protecting different interests and making sure everything runs smoothly in the property market.
Now, let's dive a little deeper into the specifics. How does someone actually go about placing a caveat on a property in Kenya? What are the steps involved?
Sure, let's break it down. So the first step is you'll need to get your hands on the official land caveat form.
Good. Where do you get that?
You can get it from the Ministry of Lands.
Makes sense.
This form, it's pretty detailed.
Okay.
You'll need to provide your personal information, obviously the details about the property, and the big one, the reason why you're putting this caveat on the land.
So it's not enough to just say, I want a caveat. You actually have to justify it, give a solid reason.
Exactly. Think of it like you're building a case. You're presenting your interest in the property, backing it up with evidence.
What kind of evidence are we talking about here?
Oh, sale agreements, inheritance documents, court orders, anything that strengthens your claim.
So it's a pretty thorough process.
It is. Once you've got your form filled out, all your documents in order, then it's time to head over to the Ministry of Lands and submit it all.
Of course, with any legal process, I'm assuming there are fees involved.
You are absolutely correct. There are fees.
Any idea what those might be? Ballpark?
Well, it can vary, of course, depends on the specifics, but you're probably looking at somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 Kenyan shillings.
Okay. So not a small amount.
No. It's always best to check with a legal professional or contact the Ministry of Lands directly to get the most up-to-date figure.
Good advice. It's always better to be prepared. So let's say you've submitted everything, you've paid your fees. What happens then? Does the ministry just automatically approve the caveat?
No, it's not automatic. They'll review your application, all the documents you provided. If everything is in order, if your claim is deemed valid, then they'll register the caveat against the property.
Okay, and that's when the restrictions officially come into play.
Exactly. It becomes a matter of public record, a big flashing sign to anyone looking at the property that, hey, there are certain limitations here.
It's like putting up a big beware sign.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
So no sneaky business can happen without dealing with that caveat first.
Exactly. It protects your interest.
So we've covered how to place a caveat. What about removing one? How does that work?
Well, the easiest way is if the person who originally placed the caveat agrees to remove it.
Okay.
They can apply to the Ministry of Lands for its removal, and if everything's straightforward, it can be a pretty simple process.
So if whatever issue prompted the caveat is resolved, everyone just signs off and it's gone.
Yep, clean and simple.
But of course, real life isn't always so simple.
Mm-hmm.
What if there's a disagreement? What if the person who put the caveat refuses to remove it?
Well, in that case, it can get a little bit more tricky. The property owner or someone else with a legitimate interest might have to go to court to get that caveat removed.
So it could end up becoming a legal battle.
Potentially, yes. A judge would have to decide whether the caveat is justified or if it should be lifted.
That needs lawyers and court fees, all that fun stuff.
Unfortunately, yes. Court proceedings, they can be quite expensive and time-consuming.
So before anyone rushes off to court to try to remove a caveat, it's really important to try and explore other options first. Try to resolve the issue amicably.
Definitely. It's always best to avoid a lengthy legal process if you can.
Okay, now we've discussed a few reasons why someone might place a caveat, but can you give us some specific examples of how caveats protect against, say, unauthorized sales or even fraud?
Sure. Imagine a family going through a tough inheritance dispute, right?
Okay.
One family member might be worried that someone else will try to sell the property without permission, so they could put a caveat on it.
So it's like a safeguard to prevent anyone from taking advantage of a messy situation.
Exactly. It ensures that the property can't be sold until everything is legally settled. Another common scenario is someone trying to sell a property they don't actually own.
Okay. How would a caveat help in that situation?
Well, let's say a potential buyer is doing their due diligence, right? They're checking all the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
They discover a caveat placed by the real owner who had no idea someone was trying to sell their property out from under them.
That would be a huge red flag.
Oh, absolutely. It would likely stop the sale right then and there.
So a caveat can really act as a shield against those kinds of fraudulent activities.
Exactly. It brings transparency to the process, makes it much harder for people to get away with those sorts of scams.
That's reassuring. It emphasizes how important it is to be thorough when dealing with property in Kenya, to do your research and make sure you're protected.
Absolutely. Diligence is key. Knowing your rights and understanding these legal tools can make a world of difference.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the materials we went through highlighted how simply knowing about these legal tools can empower individuals in the Kenyan property market.
No, for sure. Knowledge is power.
But I'm curious, how does this awareness actually translate into real-world benefits for people?
Well, think about it. When you're armed with this knowledge, you're not walking in blind.
Right.
You're less likely to be taken advantage of. You can ask the right questions, make informed decisions. Imagine a first-time home buyer, right?
Yeah.
They're excited, maybe a little nervous, and they come across a property they love. But because they've done their homework, they know to check for caveats, restrictions.
Right.
If they find something, they can ask for clarification, maybe renegotiate, or even walk away if it seems too risky.
So it's about having the confidence to navigate the process, to advocate for yourselves.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual transactions, it's about the bigger picture.
Right.
When more people are aware of these legal safeguards, the entire market benefits.
That's so.
Well, it creates more transparency, more accountability. It makes it harder for those looking to exploit the system to take advantage of people.
So it's like a ripple effect. Individual knowledge leading to a fairer, more transparent market for everyone.
Precisely. A rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that analogy. It's about creating a system where everyone can participate with confidence, knowing the rules and their rights.
Exactly.
This has been a really enlightening conversation. I think we've covered a lot of ground, from the nitty-gritty details of placing a caveat to the broader impact of this knowledge on the Kenyan property market.
It's been a pleasure breaking it all down with you.
And for our listeners, I think we've provided them with a solid foundation to start their own property journey in Kenya.
I hope so. We've given them the tools. Now it's up to them to use them.
Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Intrigued. Go ahead.
We've talked a lot about how these cautions, caveats, and restrictions protect individuals. But how about the bigger picture? How can knowing about all this contribute to, a fairer and more transparent property market in Kenya as a whole?
It's a great point, and I think it goes back to that idea of the ripple effect of knowledge. When people are more aware, when they understand these legal tools, they demand more from the system. They insist on transparency.
They're not just going to take things at face value. They're going to ask questions.
Exactly. They're going to demand accountability, fairness in every transaction. It's like a collective mindset shift towards a market where ethical practices are the norm.
Where people can't just get away with cutting corners or trying to pull a fast one.
Right, because now more people are aware of the rules of the game. They become more vigilant. They're not going to fall prey to those scams as easily.
It's like a network of informed individuals, almost like watchdogs for the market.
Yeah, I like that, watchdogs.
Yeah.
Because they're more likely to challenge anything that seems off, anything that looks suspicious.
Which ultimately leads to a better experience for everyone, buyers, sellers, everyone involved.
Exactly. A more responsible and trustworthy market.
So to wrap things up, I guess the key takeaway for our listeners is that knowledge really is power when it comes to navigating the Kenyan property market.
Absolutely. Understanding these legal tools, it's not just about protecting yourself. It's about contributing to a better system for everyone.
It's about being informed, being proactive, asking questions, and, not being afraid to speak up if something seems wrong.
Well said.
All right, that's it for this deep dive into cautions, caveats, and restrictions in Kenya.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great discussion.
Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and, as always, happy investing.